Hi, Kuljit Sehmi is joining me from the United Kingdom, where she works as a wellness coach and a practitioner in logosynthesis. So she supports people who are dealing with fibromyalgia, chronic pain, anxiety, and trauma. So thank you, Kuljit, for being here and sharing your insights and your work.
My pleasure. It's a real pleasure to be with you today, Cathy.
Great. Yeah, so let's get started because I always like to start with asking people what kind of sparked their interest in logosynthesis and for you, what sparked you to start to train in the model?
Well, I'd been on quite an adventure. I'd suffered with fibromyalgia and fatigue, and I was first introduced to energy with phototherapy patches, actually. I had taken medication for a little while, and none of it actually helped with any of my symptoms, and it made me feel worse. And these phototherapy patches were just little plasters um, that I put on acupressure points, and they reduced my pain levels, they reduced my symptoms, they helped me gain more energy. And I had no idea how they worked. I'd been an optometrist for 20 years. I was into science and, symptoms, you take medication to get rid of it. And they just blew my mind. I hadn't slept for 5 years, and within a month of using them, I was sleeping again,
Wow.
which was amazing. So I wanted to know how they worked, and introduced to meridians, energy, and that never stopped for me. Through my training, I came across logosynthesis in some Facebook groups from EFT, emotional freedom technique, and matrix reimprinting. And they just mentioned it. It was nothing about what it's about. And I was just drawn to the word. And by the third time I heard it, I was like, right, I really want to know what this is now. So my curiosity was sparked. So yeah, I looked it up on the internet, found Dr. Willem Lammers, got the books, and I was completely hooked. It was everything I'd been looking for myself and my clients, actually. So yeah, that's how it happened. Third time lucky.
That's interesting that you just kind of noticed it. So it wasn't an individual that had actually introduced you to the model. It was just kind of through social media that you heard the word and got curious.
Yeah, and it was almost like it kind of jumped out at me sometimes. And sometimes I don't, take that and notice that so much.
Yeah.
So, but by the third time, I was like, I need to look at this. What's
Yeah.
this?
So
So,
you've trained in other healing models, like energy-based healing models. How does logosynthesis compare and differ to those models?
it actually surprised me in how different it is, actually. I find that it's more than a model, it's more than a modality. It's such a comprehensive system, and that you can use it for any aspect in your life. It's not limited to anxiety or trauma, to anything. Um, and I think what really struck me about it is that the client can learn to use it for themselves. I mean, for me, that's hugely important in the way that I work with people. It was hugely important for me when I was struggling, feeling lost with fibromyalgia and trying to find support, that I could feel empowered. So I like to um, have that aspect. And also, it just works on so many levels simultaneously. So some modalities, it takes a lot. You have to deal with really individual, specific aspects, and it can take a long time. And with um, logosynthesis, I find that it works on the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual level. Um, and I think for a lot of modalities, that spiritual aspect is missing. For me, that's a huge aspect. When I want to work with someone and even on myself, I know there's more than just my body. And I've kind of always known that, but that's, I think, working with the whole person on all those levels. Um, it also simplifies everything down to an energetic imprint or trigger. And I think that takes away a lot of the overwhelm. And it's simple for the practitioner and the client. I think it makes life easy and they can just relax. I think it's so important that the person you're working with can just relax, um, and not have to do anything, not have to think about tapping or whether they're doing it right or whether they're, following you right. And I think that's, for me, I find that's a key thing. Um, and it's gentle, it's
Yeah.
quick, and it's easy. I don't know what more I could ask for, really.
I know that's a lot of reasons, isn't it? But yeah, I certainly hear you when you're saying, as far as people that present are probably people with anxiety and chronic pain, and they're kind of tapped out to learn something new. So if you have to learn a new model, it's kind of overwhelming even just to think of that, and there's not a whole lot of room in the tank to take something new on. So for someone to be able just to let you guide them through it without having to think about what do I have to do when I go home, knowing that the trigger will be resolved and they can just simply be, is very liberating and relieving for them, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It takes the overwhelm. They're already overwhelmed managing and trying to cope with just getting through the day. So
Yeah.
to really simplify, and take it back to, well, all you need to do is say some words, is is the most beautiful and natural thing I think that that we can do with people as guides, really. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do
Yeah. And
love.
when we look at it, because we're conditioned differently, right? So we're conditioned in our work and in our home life that you have to do more and you have to, go faster. But when we take it back, like you mentioned on the spiritual side, if we take it back to prayer and the power of words, that we can shift things beyond their meaning and without having to know how or why it all works. And if we can, Willem's had a career of working in change and development and guided change. And, his expertise has allowed him to come up with what those specific words are and how to identify the trigger. And if we can just follow the method, then we can support people with that work. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it works, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
just works so quickly. I love that it, um, you know, the client feels the shift in themselves,
Mhm.
and you don't have to work hard. I mean, that's a big one for me. It took a long while for me to realize don't have to work really hard. Um, as Willem says, slow and stupid
Yes.
behind the client. And I think, um, I really love that you just follow what comes and you don't need to change anything or make anything happen. So I really love that aspect of it.
Yeah, and that's what is one of the pieces that stands out for me because I come a little bit from the background to be strong, reliable, that do it all, do it more. And that has been my conditioning. So it's really hard to, and I know even in working with others and a lot of us, the biggest struggle is probably like, what do you mean? We're not looking to be stronger and we're not doing more, like we're letting go. And for often the opposite of being strong and reliable, we think is weak and inconsistent, maybe, right? And so, but that's not what we're talking about, because when we're working in this strong and reliable mode, things keep piling on, the demands keep increasing. And I always say, I can only be so strong, I can only be so reliable. And that's resistance, and there's tension in that. And so logosynthesis kind of works with the resistance and the tension to restore flow. And so what comes instead of strong and reliable is more steadiness and flow in our lives. And we can let things, instead of having to control everything, we can just let things flow and have our energy available to access the resources that are available to us. And so instead of, reacting to other people and being triggered by other people, we can be present and we can all kind of create together a little bit more easily and be instead of being stuck in reactive mode. So is that something that you see your clients present with?
Absolutely. These learned behaviors, conditioned behaviors that we learn really at a very young age, often from our parents. I find many clients say, my parents were always busy, they never stopped. Um, and that takes away so much from the family relationships, I think. I have many clients, and I hear it so often that, oh, my parents didn't really hug me, and that's very hard for a child who just wants love, So this busyness, this working hard, we learn it subconsciously. We kind of just model it without realizing that this these are the role models we've learned to be like, because that's how they were in the world. This is how I need to be to get on in the world. And your choices are very limited. They're our key relationships. So that's where we learn from. And it's surprisingly how deeply and how well we learn those. Um, I think for me, really learning that deeply that, I have to be strong to earn love. I have to do more. I have to gain approval. I have to um, gain some validation and attention. And that's how I need to be to get what I need. Coming from very busy parents who were just trying to take care of us. But yes, I hear that very often, and I learnt that very well. So it's been a long time chipping away at that and peeling the layers to actually let myself be okay with expressing what was inside, because this facade of I'm strong, inside often we feel in turmoil, we don't have peace, we don't have flow. Um, we can feel very chaotic and frustrated and overwhelmed. And yet we have this mask where we show I'm strong. So we play a role, almost like an identity we take on.
Yeah, and society certainly conditions us very well for that, right? So we are conditioned. And the biggest thing for me, I guess, through this whole process of learning and training in logosynthesis is that as soon as I switch from thinking I can change those beliefs to approaching it from an energetic level instead of a cognitive level, everything transformed. Because if I think I can change my need to be busy, I'm not going to I'm not going to achieve those results that I want by making behavior changes, because my underlying beliefs are being triggered by these energetic perceptions
Yeah.
that hijack my cognitive thought process. And so, but when I start to look at it, okay, what am I reacting to? What's triggering that reaction, and resolve that underlying trigger, then it falls away and it becomes irrelevant. And so I think that's what I find with logosynthesis is that it allows that shift. And, after that trigger is gone and you ask people, what do you notice now? It's, I feel peace, I feel calm. And especially in these times when you feel more at peace and more calm, it's certainly a much better spot to look at change and creativity and that. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think, we are conditioned to be at this level, to stay at that cognitive level, to use willpower, to make things change. And I think that's really the hard way to do it. Looking at the triggers and those beliefs that we've learned early on actually changes it much more naturally for you. And I think you're absolutely right that slowing down to notice what's happening in your body, to notice your feelings and your reactions, is so hard for so many people when they're juggling all these responsibilities, all these expectations. from others and from ourselves, it's really hard to say, right now I'm going to stop, I'm going to
Yeah.
slow down, and I'm going to see why I'm reacting or feeling this way and actually get into the body. That's where we lose out. I think that's a huge um, connection that we miss when we're busy and strong and never let ourselves off.
I can relate to that. Yeah, and one of the things with logosynthesis is that Willem approaches work from looking at thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations. So, what bothers you? How do you suffer? He doesn't just look at distressing thoughts or distressing emotions. He includes what are those physical sensations in the body. And really, if you look at what keeps people home from work or what makes people unable to do the things they love, it's because they physically can't do it. So, if I say I'm overwhelmed, it's one thing to say I'm overwhelmed, but when I say that I can't move my arm or I have this intense feeling that's shooting through my body, those are the things that hold us back. And Willem uses those sensations as information so that we can identify and resolve the underlying trigger. And when it's gone, that physical sensation is gone and doesn't come back. And so when I look at your work with people dealing with fibromyalgia and chronic pain, and these are all things that they've gone through the healthcare system to try to find the cause and to find a solution. And often people are left struggling because they think there's something unsolvable, I guess maybe is the best word. So can you tell us a little bit about your work maybe with clients as far as they come to you thinking that they've got an unsolvable situation? How does that unfold when you work with them?
Usually a little bit of a process actually, because we're used to going to doctors and consultants and getting the answers. And when you're told that actually, no, there is no answer, you have to manage it for the rest of your life. It's really traumatic. I know I started going on forums and I was thinking, oh my children are going to get this. It's hereditary. I'm going to be in a wheelchair. The fear actually is huge. So they come in with all of that. So what we first do is we look at the fears um, and resolve those again from an energetic perspective, but also from a perspective of empowering them. So often they have anxiety, high anxiety, lots of overwhelm, lots of frustration, and lots of fear. And so that's where we start with what they come in with. And so some clients will use the patches that we can use on the nervous system to calm the nervous system, to stop that constant stimulation, which can help them. I'll often teach them EFT because they can use it simply, or havening, where they just stroke down their arms using that signal from the body to go to the brain. So I kind of like to empower them and help them self-regulate a little bit and learn to do that. And then we move on to processing some of the emotions, because with fibromyalgia and chronic pain, what people don't realize is that emotional pain and physical pain to the body and the brain, they use the same pathways, they use the same brain areas that light up. So if you've cut yourself or had an accident, the same pathways are used if you've got an emotional hurt or a pain. And we don't learn how to process those things. We tend to push them down and bury them away. And that accumulates in the body as stress and tension. Something's not right internally. Physically, it can lead to tension, pressure, constant stress cycle. So your body actually ends up in constant sympathetic dominance, which is constant stress. Now, our bodies love a little bit of stress. but for a short time. Long term, it can struggle. And if this goes on for years, like that expectation to be strong, taking on all the, it's almost like we carry the world on our shoulders, isn't it? We're responsible for everyone and everything. That's a chronic stress. And what that stops our body doing is going into the rest and digest cycle, which is the parasympathetic cycle where we heal. So when we're in chronic stress, our body literally can't actually access its innate healing ability, and it's designed to heal. So teaching clients and empowering them in emotional processing through journaling, through reflection, is a really key part, for them to learn that it's okay to be with your emotions, and it's okay to feel your emotions and to express them, because our body only has a certain capacity to hold all these emotions that we don't deal with. Um, and I find that's a really big piece of working with fibromyalgia and chronic pain. But then we go into the reactions and following the reactions and those nerve pathways and the suffering and how they're feeling, to actually follow down to the memories, the traumas, the adverse childhood experiences, which always, I find in fibromyalgia and chronic pain, I don't think I've had one client who hasn't had unprocessed or suppressed trauma. Often there's PTSD or bad dreams, depression, and through the work, that all actually changes. So as you resolve and shed light on these imprints so they fade away, it surprises people that the physical changes. And I think that's the hardest thing to get your head around, isn't it? That how can dealing with that actually change me physically? But it really does. And I get to see that work beautifully every day in my work. So it's so surprising. I love the look when people are in a session and they're like, oh, that pain was quite intense when we started. Where's it gone? And they get this look of confusion and looking for it. But um, it really is fascinating how it all links together. We can't separate those things, I don't think. We're a whole human being, and everything, every cell, every signal, every energetic process, it interacts with everything else, and that includes our physical body,
Yeah.
which is good because we can resolve these things then.
Yeah, and being able, I agree with you, like when people end up having, especially if it's something that's been with them for a long, long time, which many adverse childhood experiences is they don't know anything different. And so there's certain pains that have always been with them. And to have that gone is just, yeah, mind boggling. Like, how do I understand this? And to me, kind of talking about the frozen sensory perceptions, those images and sounds that get frozen and stuck. And if we can clear that away, it just eliminates the trigger and gives such freedom again. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think, when you hear a song from your childhood, or you smell some food you used to love, or you're almost transported right back there. And I think they're lovely, wonderful imprints to feel and have. But on the other side of things, we have these difficult experiences, these challenging or overwhelming or painful experiences, and they get triggered in the same way. So, on some level, we've all kind of experienced some of those things, and it is difficult to actually sometimes understand it, but we've probably all experienced it at some point in our lives.
Yeah, and
I
sometimes, those angry looks of a parent might not sound so intimidating, like it sounds kind of foolish as an adult that someone's angry look could make you scared or panicked.
Yeah.
And yet, as a young child, if you get an angry look from someone, whether it be a parent or a sibling or a teacher,
Yeah.
that is very sensory, like it makes a lot of sensory perceptions arise, right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah. With chronic pain, I always find there's really strong emotions um, that haven't been processed. And and also especially frustration, anger. I think anger is I find it's always linked with chronic pain and fibromyalgia. We might have seen people who have been angry or experienced that in our childhood, and we kind of learn that it's wrong to express anger.
Yeah.
So we don't do it. We wouldn't do it because we'd never want anyone to feel the way we did when we saw someone who was angry as a child. And all that gets pushed inside into our body. And we know anger is almost a fight response, isn't it? A stress
Yeah.
response. And that leads to tension in our bodies and tightness. And when our body can't flow and be fluid and flexible, then that leads to pain and all sorts of um, things like headaches, IBS, stomach problems, all sorts of uh, little signs that you might have before, bigger things happen. It's your body communicating that, hey, something's not right, something's wrong here. You're not free and flexible and happy at the moment. So, yeah, the body's a
Yeah,
one.
because I look at it that, most people say, oh, they're just my reactions. It's not a big deal. I don't have to deal with it. So a lot of times in your practice, I can imagine that people only come when they are experiencing symptoms that are getting in the way of them living their life. Whereas most people that, especially in my everyday life, you see people every day who are we all react to what's happening around us. And yet we are often hesitant to actually say what's causing that. Let me resolve the trigger. And I guess what I've learned from Willem is that I met him in a very busy time in my life where I was noticing that the way I was reacting, I wasn't always happy with that. And yet I didn't know how to respond differently. Like I was hijacked in the moment with these automatic responses.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so, but I was able to use the same technique, the same method
yeah.
to notice what I was reacting to and just be with that. What are the thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations, and resolve the trigger. So I guess my thing is we don't have to wait until our body breaks down. We can,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. It's so much nicer and easier to not have to go through that experience. And that's why I do this work, because I didn't ever want to have that experience again. And so I was like, I need to, resolve the root causes, because I'm not going to experience this pain ever again. And that really does inform a lot of the work I do. So I do really work with people who do want long-term change and who are willing, and it does take openness and courage, I think, really, to do this work, but who are open to looking at these other things that may be causing the symptoms, their beliefs and things they've learned, because they're really powerful.
Yeah, and I think again, I keep going back to, our society conditions us, but for the longest time, society does condition us to kind of keep it inside and deal with it, be strong, cope. We've all had a difficult time, so we have to
Keep
learn how
going,
to
push
cope with the
through.
difficult time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You think you've had it rough. Well, I have had it rougher, right? And we
yeah,
kind of build
absolutely.
on those stories. So,
Yeah,
right. And if I could get through this, then surely you could get through this. But
yeah,
what we sometimes neglect is that we've all had different childhood experiences and we've all had different experiences as we've gone through life. Some people have experienced very traumatic events
yeah,
and they experience life very differently
yeah,
than someone like myself who has been blessed not to. And so, but for me, once we start to recognize that how we react and the intensity of those reactions is based on these sensory perceptions that are in our personal space, and we have a way to resolve them,
Yeah.
then everything switches, right? Because I can then be more compassionate to someone that is annoying me, right? Like
Yeah.
I can see it from their perspective a little bit better. And maybe, initially it's like, well, everybody has to know this so that they can all solve their problems. But maybe it's just, if I know this, I can be more present and not trigger them to react the way they do. So it's an understanding that I think as people start to understand the philosophy of logosynthesis and how empowering that is,
Yeah.
it just transforms the space that we live in, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point you've made because, we do think, oh, they're causing it. It's something external, it's someone external, it's some external situation. But when you bring it back to you personally and look at your reactions, that's something you can look at, resolve, deal with, and change. And you're right, that changes everything. It changes how you experience life, it changes how you perceive things, how you think, because it's just these um, perceptions, these imprints that you've accumulated through your life that are causing you to react that way. So it really does put you in charge again, doesn't it?
Which is very liberating, right? Like it's
Really?
very, I can feel ease now that, because I've always, kind of been driven by the hurry up driver and get things done and go faster and do more. And that served me very well through a corporate career, right? And volunteering in the community and being a super mom in a lot of ways. But it starts to break down, and it doesn't necessarily go cold turkey right away, but you start to notice that your reactions are impacting how other people are feeling. So if all of a sudden you've got a lot of tension in your voice, or you're shouting out in anger or frustration, those reactions are impacting more than you. And I guess in the pandemic, if we've learned anything, is that our actions impact more than just us, and that we have a responsibility for how we react in our everyday lives. And I think this offers such a beautiful way to embrace that, so that and once we recognize that this is a natural human response, then we can be a little bit more empathetic and compassionate to what's happening.
Yeah, and there's no blame or judgment or shame of how you react. It's just there's something causing that, and when you know that and you take that, that's gone, that stress and that fear of even looking at that, I think that really does change your perspective. But I think for many people who aren't involved in, energy or energy psychology and doing these kind of things, it can be quite difficult, and it can be a process to just learn that gently, I think.
Yeah, and I always say the best way to do it is just to experience it. And for some
Yeah.
people, when they experience it, I'll
Yeah.
notice later that I'm talking to them and it's like, oh, yeah, well, that doesn't bother me anymore. But they can't really remember when it did bother them, right? So, because we're talking energy and shifts can be subtle,
Yeah.
sometimes we don't even recognize what shifted with it. But someone that's always annoyed us may not annoy us anymore. But when we reframe it, it's like, well, I don't think they really ever bothered me that much, right?
And that's a huge shift, isn't it? And that's definitely worth having. Imagine, people are not annoying you anymore. How would you feel? I think that's the thing. We think it's from them, but it's within us. And when we deal
Yeah,
with within us, everything externally changes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kuljit. This has been awesome. Is there any message you would like to leave people as far as with regard to logosynthesis, with regard to your work?
I would say, with regard to logosynthesis, just as you said, Kathy, just experience it. Give it a go and try it. Read the books, get some information, because it is such a beautiful, natural, organic modality, and it can bring back that energy flow of all these things that might be disrupting how you experience life. So it's such a beautiful, gentle, and simple way of doing it. With my work, I would say to people, slow down. This myth of being busy, of multitasking, of doing 100 things. I know so many of us have that constant list in our mind. And it's hard to slow down when you're carrying the world and responsibility on your shoulders. But the most beautiful thing when you slow down, you can actually reflect on what's important to you. You can reflect on your reactions and bring some awareness about what's happening for you. And that's where you can change it. It just gives you so many more new possibilities that please listen to your body and take some time and space for yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I agree 100%. And what I often notice is when people start to use logosynthesis, things automatically slow down for them. And I always say you don't have to think about how it's going to work out. Just trust the process, and the energy will shift, and you'll see what follows. So we don't have to know exactly what's going to be our next steps, but we can enjoy the journey, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome. So where can people find you online? How can they get in touch with you?
They can find me at centrebalance.co.uk, and all my contact details are there, or they can email me directly at kuljitsehmi@centrebalance.co.uk.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kuljit.
Thank you, Cathy. It was a real delight to chat with you.